Hello and welcome to episode 68 of The Garden Log with me, Ben Dark. I am a gardener and this is a gardening podcast in which I talk about life and the activities within a large garden of which I am proud to be head gardener. This week in the garden we were planting the first of the bulbs. We're not into the big heavy hitting tulip and daffodil planting season yet, but I'm planting some of the more ephemeral bulbs, some of the erythroniums, the chamaesyas. I'm talking about techniques for that. I'm talking about some very, very heavy duty weeding, industrial grade weeding, some leave you bleeding weeding, and I'm talking about some trees that I'm not really getting on with. Some trees that have displeased me. All this and much, much more to wander through. So enough of this introduction. Let's get on with the week in gardening. Welcome to the week in gardening. A week that has been dominated by water in many ways. There is water coming down from the heavens, there is water rising from beneath the lawn, and there is water slowly creeping up the walls of my house. All of these are worrying to various degrees for different reasons. The water coming down from heaven is obviously welcome. I spent all last week praying for such, but it does mean that things tend to flop and fall over, to get weighed down. Wonderful plants that are coming out now, like the very, very large flowered cultivar of the gladioli, are prone to bending beneath their own sodden weight. The grasses collapse sideways, splay themselves out on the lawn. And all sorts of things are washed into places where things ought not to be. But really we can deal with that. The water coming up from the lawn is due to an incident. We're doing a lot of lawn spiking this year. We're upping the lawn spiking regime. We have this wonderful machine where you can change the tines over. It drives these tines into the lawn. And sometimes we use hollow tines which take out a core of soil, which we then leave to dry on top or brush up or brush in and put top dressing in. And sometimes we use solid spines, pencil spines that are just spikes basically, and they go down a little bit deeper into the soil and break things apart, fracture the soil, make great cracks and holes in it. And they also make wonderful cracks and holes in water pipes, as we found out on Monday. We managed to spike right along this water pipe, which led to a sort of subcutaneous lawn bruise. I suppose it's more than a bruise, more of an aneurysm, more of a burst artery within the brain of the lawn. And this has caused various wetting problems throughout the week. And the third problem, the damp in the walls, is not an issue for this podcast. You will be relieved to know. Here we will focus on matters horticultural. Goodness knows there are enough problems out there in the gardens without worrying about the state of one's architecture. So on Monday, the day started with this lawn incident, which took a little bit of time, took digging some trenches, which then fill up because the ground's so saturated. But eventually we located the pipe, and these are those 25mm blue pipes that anyone who's done any landscaping work will know are pretty ubiquitous. You can actually cut them pretty easily. You can cut through them with a pair of secateurs, and you'd fit on a couple of junctions and splice the pipe back together. But that relies on you having the junctions, having the couplers to splice these two things together, which we didn't. So the whole week has seen the garden sitting with a trench and a bit of cut out exposed blue pipe and a barrow of soil nearby, looking generally scruffy, when I had been railing against the electricians just 2 weeks ago about how they leave things half completed and looking undone within the garden. Now we are at it as well. Hopefully that will all be fixed, the lawn back to its smooth green sward early next week, and we can pretend that the whole thing never happened. In horticultural tasks, on Monday I was planting bulbs. I was planting bulbs with my new hipster hoary knife. And this is that very trendy tool that is the cross between a trowel and a Crocodile Dundee style Bowie knife. It's not really a knife for doing heavy levering bulb planting jobs. I bought this knife from a salesman, from a stand on the Nowaki Hoary stand. And from the way it was described, you would think that you could sell all of your gardening equipment. Get rid of your trowels and your spades and your lawn mowers, get rid of your van, get rid of your yard and all your assistants, because all you need is this knife. And obviously that's not true. Nothing is that simple. But it is very good for digging in not very, very heavy soil. Then I would still always use a trenching shovel or a spade, something with a bit of leverage to plant your bulbs. But it's good for a situation where you might use a trowel normally, say in a flower bed where the space is limited and you want to be quite precise, but where there are lots of stones in the ground, because the pointed end of the knife, it comes to actually quite a wicked point, is much better at finding its way past stones, past the side of them, and letting you push down, whilst the blunt tip of the trowel more often hits it at loggerheads and stops completely. So it has a use. It is now going to be part of my arsenal. It's also very, very good for doing just little bits of weeding as you wander around. You have it strapped to your belt, and then you see, oh, look, a dandelion growing in the crack between paving and lawn. And because it's such a pleasure to sort of unsheath a great big knife, you find yourself doing it and instantly wheedling that dandelion out, rather than adding it to that deadly mental checklist of, oh, I must remember to go and take that dandelion out. Add that as item number 67. So that's a reason, I think, enough to have this tool with me. Anyway, a long way of saying that I did some bulb planting with a trowel and a knife and a spade. I was putting in some erythronium in the woodland area. This is Erythronium pagoda, which fans of the dogtooth violet will know is the bright yellow one, the one with the very distinctive yellow flowers that fan out like a sort of outre fairy's hat. And it has great big lush leaves. And we're putting in about 400, or maybe 500 actually, throughout the woodland areas, hoping that they will clump up on their own over the coming years. And because we were searching for places where they would be happy, rather than where they would be putting on a one-off show, I spent quite a lot of time examining the soil, trying to find bits that retained a little bit of damp, a little bit of leaf mouldy moisture, despite the very long dry spell, because there the bulbs can live and plump away. In this garden, I've mentioned many times that we use tulips almost as one-off displays. They're annuals. They're planted and taken out and got rid of because they don't tend to come back as well, and they certainly don't in the shade. But sometimes we miss them. And over the last couple of weeks I have been finding tulips from last year's displays. They are shooting out their little roots, they're getting going, but they are such small little withered things. They put everything into that flowering, they really thrust up in the service of their masters, in the service of our displays, and then they never got enough light to plump themselves back up again. And I don't want that to happen to these erythronium. That would be devastating. So I have been searching for the right place. I was quite disappointed at the amount of mould in the erythronium order. I probably had to throw away 1 in every 8 bulbs due to it going squishy, and a lot more had a blue mould covering them. I don't know if that developed just in the packaging, or whether the storage facilities in the bulb company need some work. You're always going to get some duff bulbs in a bulb order, but this seemed to be verging just about on the too high end. Those that remained firm and waxy and pale, as opposed to soft and browning and speckled with blue. They were put into suitable spots, nowhere in dry shade, so nowhere really close to the boles of the trees, unfortunately, because I thought that would look very nice. Nowhere in the rain shadow of hedges or large shrubs. Nowhere that gets a really, really heavy beech canopy over the top, because there I feel they will just fade away over the years. So actually it was fairly hard to find spaces for this vast amount of bulbs. I managed to in the end, and those that I've planted I'm sure will all come up, but it won't be until spring 2021 we see if this tactic of hunting for the right erythronium place has truly worked or not. It is a very long game, this gardening business of ours. Within this game there are certain rules, certain things that must be obeyed, and one of those is that if it's raining heavily at 8 o'clock in the morning, you stay in the tea room a little bit longer. And on Tuesday we stayed drinking tea until mid-morning. It was torrential. In fact, it was incredible. It was oppressive. It's the way you want a dry spell to end. Certainly not with a whimper. I am now waking up in the dark and getting out of bed and going downstairs to drink my cup of tea in the pitch black. And I had one of those terrifying moments sitting there drinking my tea and listening to this apocalyptic rain outside, and cosy with the lights on. All I can see is my own reflection through the windows of the kitchen, but you hear the wetness coming down. It's like being a night watchman on a long night shift and listening to these inhuman noises beyond the ramparts and thinking, oh God, what's the revelation that dawn is going to bring? What's out there for me? And then, of course, I got onto my little bicycle and cycled through London to the train station, through the splashy puddles, through taxis spraying you, and then out into the countryside on the other side once I'd done my journey up from Roundabout. And the lanes were flooded and sodden, and everyone was having one of those panics that they do when things have been dry for a while. And the 4x4s of the well-to-do ladies driving their kids to school were stuck in puddles and splashing each other and driving into hedges. And I had to wiggle and weave all the way through these things. And then, because it hasn't rained for ages, all of the debris is being floated around, and things that you shouldn't see floating along a street are floating along streets. And it was quite exciting, quite fun. And once you've got completely wet, you don't worry about getting wetter. So I arrived to work, got changed, got dry, drank tea and coffee, and then went out eventually when things calmed down. And after that, it was actually quite a muggy, warm day. It threatened to rain constantly and would put out these sort of raiding parties, these occasional brief blasts which would make you put on your coat and scurry around and get togged up for the wet, and then it would dry out again, which is annoying because you want to settle down. If you've got yourself dressed up like an Atlantic trawler man, you want to face some weather. You don't want to go out and just get cooked by muggy sunshine again. I was being cooked while I planted 400 Camassia out in the meadow. These are Camassia Cusickii to add to the couple of dozen I planted last year. If you were a listener of the Garden Log last autumn, you might remember that I planted these, I can't remember how many they were, 20 or 30 or 40 or something, as a test in our muntjac deer-infested meadow to see if they would be deer food or not. And it turns out they are in the not category, so I'm going to bulk those plantings up with another 400. I got those in, I completely ignored the hoary knife and went straight for the trenching shovel, a good stab into the ground, stamp on the shoulders of the shovel, wiggle it back, put the bulb in. It was quite a swift operation, although my knee started to ache a little. I don't know if that's age. I don't normally get gardening injuries. I think it's because I do so much of it that your body's very used to those strange actions. But at the end of the day, my knee was hurting a little bit. While I was doing this, my colleague was building a deer-proof cage, like one that you would lower into the water were deer's sharks. Obviously they're not, so what it was just a little square box with some heavy-duty wire nailed onto it. And within that, we planted a lovely black mulberry out in the orchard. It's bittersweet because I adore mulberries, I absolutely love them, but I like them at 250 years old, and it's so nice to give a gift to posterity, to the people who will experience this garden in the future, when this thing has gone out and it's started leaning its elbows down on the lawn and started bubbling up, started doing that strange mutated trunk shape that looks like it survived a nuclear winter or two. And we will never see that. We will see it as a spry and sprightly young tree. We will see it producing bigger leaves and glossier leaves each year, but we'll never get to see that, which is sad, but there are other mulberries, I suppose, for us to look at. And as I say, it is a very important part of gardening, giving these gifts to the future. It just seems very unfair that life is so short and trees live so long. Never mind, not all trees deserve to live very long. On Wednesday, I began the day wet once again. Every time I got on my bike, I think this week, it started raining, either going to work or coming from work. But there we go. It was a momentous day, one of those moments of shift, moment of tilt, where a momentum starts to build, and a job that is in itself insignificant in the work of an hour takes on a horrible importance. I collected my first full barrow load of leaves from the croquet lawn. This is a sign of the future. This is the times we now live in. Welcome to autumn. Welcome to the rake and the leaf blower. It was quite a nice barrow. It looked very good once I'd blown it into one heap, because it came from two early dropping trees. One is one of those purple cherry plums. I think it's probably Prunus cercifera nigra, but if it's not, it's one of those very similar black cherry plums. And that drops its leaves in the purple stage. They don't really change colour. They emerge purple, they live their lives purple, and they drop purple. And then the other tree was a birch, a weeping silver birch, very, very mature, so the trunk no longer has that beautiful white to it. And the top is another thing that very, very old, mature weeping trees do, where it forms a very flat top, a flat platform, as if it were the nest of some giant crane bird. In fact, both of these trees I really dislike for separate reasons. I dislike the prunus because it's just not a tree I enjoy. I think they look sickly a lot of the time. This one doesn't. It escapes the sickly vibe, but it has the quality that many of these very, very dark, very big, plum-coloured things do, of sucking the light out of a horizon. Whenever I see them planted, particularly as street trees, I think to myself, well, it's nice there's a tree there, but gosh, wouldn't this be great if the leaves were green? This street needs green. It doesn't need some strange plum-coloured tree that looks as if we're living in a photo negative. I want to see something fresh and light and vibrant. Anyway, the plum dropped its leaves. I don't like the birch. I'm a fan of weeping birch. They're lovely trees. This one is just over mature, and it's not looking elegant anymore. I think it should probably come down. But the leaves together on the floor were greater than the sum of the trees themselves. It looked magnificent. If I had time, I could have been like one of these Instagram gardeners. You might not know about this, but there's this wonderful trend on Instagram where people spend hours arranging leaves on a colour spectrum. I could have done one of those, and it would have been gorgeous, but I didn't. I raked them up and put them in a barrow and put them on the compost heap. At the moment, we are dealing with very grass-heavy, claggy end-of-season compost, so I'm going to add leaves to it for the first month or so of autumn, and then once things start getting overwhelming, once the leaves are coming from all directions, and we can no longer cope, then the leaves will be stored separately and added later on. And so the first barrow load of leaves of autumn collected in mid-September. I wonder when we will scrape up the last of them. A game for listeners of the Garden Log, perhaps. Place your bets. Write in and tell me when the last barrow will be lifted. A triumphant salute, a blast with the leaf blower. I'll wave it in the air and go brrrr one last time, and then throw the loathsome thing away and not look at it for a month. It's such a pity that such a beautiful time of year should be soundtracked by such a horrendous racket. But never mind, here's some bonus gardening for you. On Thursdays I normally go into the archives or go somewhere to write some garden history report or other. But I didn't. I went to the garden. I came in and did some proper work in a proper place because there were things I needed to get on with, and I'd taken time off the week before and I had various things I needed to get done. So I went in there and did some old-fashioned weeding. I did some weeding of the ground elder that snuck into one of the beds, which is a magnificent weed. I know that sometimes I get angry about the world of horticultural myth, the things that we tell each other that aren't really true, like Japanese knotweed is going to bring down our civilization, all its buildings, structures and institutions. That's not going to happen. But ground elder really does deserve its reputation. It's amazing the way its roots get around. All the rain we had recently mean it's quite good root teasing out weather, which is why I was doing it. And I got this little clump of it and traced the roots back. There were only about 4 leaves of ground elder, but the roots must have gone back for 2.5 feet, and some of the roots snuck their way over the top of some of the irises that I'd planted the year before, over the top of those very fat rhizomes of the irises, which is a really good feat of growing. They do fantastic work. So I dug some of those out, and then we did real weeding. We went into the building site where they are building this vast thing that's going to be open at some point, and went behind the hoardings, which have been up for a couple of years, and really got to task with the things that were growing between the hoardings and this scraggly hedge that's in there. And there were docks, and there were brambles, and there were nettles. It's amazing. That was such a dark and dingy corridor. But life is rampant. Life was really thrusting its way up there in all its thorny, scraggly, stinging magnificence. And it was quite satisfying, actually. It reminded me of the early days of my gardening career. Because now I'm working in established gardens, and we might clear out new areas, but when we do it, we tend to do it with diggers and en masse. And it's not quite the same as when I was starting out in southwest London on a little pink bicycle, cycling around with all my tools in a big traveller's backpack. And then I would go into just horrendous gardens that had been bought by a young couple, and the couple had bought it 2 years ago and had waited till they'd done the kitchen before they phoned a gardener. And they'd probably bought it off someone who'd been renting it out to a load of students for 5 years, and they had bought it from someone who died 10 years before that. And so you'd get the most amazing weeds growing everywhere, and you'd be sent in to just do battle and come out at the end of the day lacerated, absolutely shredded from heaving these things around, contorting yourself into the strangest of positions between fences and ruined garden features, and bending spades and breaking tines off forks. It was a very different style of gardening. And on Thursday I was going back to that. Pulled out barrow and barrow loads of plants to go off to the plant graveyard, and then once we had a clear strip, dumped a load of compost down there, because it will one day be planted. One day we will cultivate this, and having compost there makes it less likely that the builders will decide to put a crane on top of it. I'm not saying they won't. They did drop a entire porter cabin where they put their site office on top of the young magnolia. Builders are plant blind. It's a sad condition, which means they don't see the difference between plants. Sometimes they don't even see plants are there. It's not malice. They just can't see them. Something worthy of study, I think. someone should do a double-blind test on the ability of a bricklayer to spot a magnolia tree. Anyway, that was fun. And sometimes it's satisfying to work on a job that is judged not by fine aesthetic questions essentially of taste, of whether people like serpentine lines or straight, or whether they like orange in a garden or not. On this, what we were being judged on was, can I see the ground? Has it got things growing in it? No. Brilliant. Good job. And then on Friday, I went into the semi-wild woodlandy areas and did some more weeding. And this weeding was selective weeding. This area is going to be allowed to grow wild and flower and be slightly weedy, but I need to stop an overgrowth of some particular weeds, particularly Geum, wood avens, Geum urbanum, which really is going everywhere in there. Instead, I want more of the wonderful little violets that we have growing in there. I want more of the biennials, more of the foxgloves. It's a very different type of weeding to the weeding from the day before. It's very much weeding as an editorial tool, rather than as step one in a process. I enjoyed it because I enjoy being out in the woodland, and because I really love wood avens. It's one of my favourite little weeds. It's really cheerful. I like it. It reminds me of its obviously its cousins, the cultivated geums. But also I like it for the strange cinnamony roots. I think I talked about that. It might be in episode 1 of the Garden Log. If not, it's in one of the very early episodes, in the first 5, talking about how the roots taste of cinnamon. You'd never use it. It'd be a very pointless thing to do, to dig them up and wash them dry and get all the grit off them and make a cinnamon tincture. But you probably could. You could do it. You could probably do a course showing people how to do it. You could bill it as Weed Your Own Christmas, and you could make a mulled wine of Geum root and sell it to Back to the Land movement people for I don't know how much these courses cost. Dozens and dozens of pounds. I did not do this, and I threw a good full barrow of potential into the compost heap to rot down. And with that done, a small sit on the digger, mix it all in, it was time to leave the garden, to leave employed gardening for another week, and go off to the weekend, to enjoy the weekend, which would eventually culminate in me sitting here recording this podcast. I've done no gardening this weekend in my own garden because it's been too wet, too rainy. I've just been able to look out of the window at the still lush little square. If anyone's wondering, I've given up the fight against the slugs. I've given up my patrols and my merciless battling. I'm now just planting plants that the slugs aren't eating. I've got lots of sedums out in the garden. The hydrangeas have grown big enough now that the slugs aren't eating them down to sticks, which they had been doing. I'm growing Hagnacloa, and there are lots of Japanese anemones out there which they don't seem to touch. And roses, an abundance of roses, because slugs don't like roses for some reason, even the really tempting lush-leaved varieties. And then I've got some shinier leaved little things that they're not really going through either. I'm sure that some people, some maybe politicians would be appalled. They would call this an act of capitulation. But I don't think it is an act of capitulation. I think it's an act of pragmatism. I don't have the time, the will, or the stomach to be out there in dawn and dusk every day snipping things. I think I have rattled on enough. I have taken all the time that I might have used for recommendations in talking about the garden. It's that extra day. It's coming in on Thursdays. But never mind. Just pretend that I recommended you something very, very interesting, something very exciting. I recommended you Gardener's World, the RHS Garden magazine, Gardens Illustrated, and all of the other stuff that you know about already. I said, go and see them. There's a reason why they're popular. And then you did. and you came back knowing all about colchicum and asters and the mental health benefits of gardening, all those really worthwhile things. So well done. Well done for going and finding out about that, and well done for listening to me for this last half an hour. I hope that you have had a wonderful week and that you will have a wonderful week. I will see you back here for the next episode of The Garden Look. Thank you very much and goodbye.